Mr. Chairman, you are live, so whenever you're ready.
Come into session. Senator Drew, we have you sitting here. You caused us to be late for lunch, so I believe Co-Chairman Nicholas is not here, so we're going to do the report from Regulatory Reduction Task Force. Would you like to proceed?
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much, and thank the members of the committee. I apologize for making you late for lunch. Guys, don't you think you're beating up on Democrat stuff this week, or you want us to have at it a little bit more? Just kidding, Mr. President.
Don't tempt me.
Always a pleasure to see all of you. Yes, my co-chair, Chairman Nicholas, could not be with us today. He had some proceedings in Lander that he had to attend to. He sends his apologies and asked me to sub in for him. Last interim, after being created by the Management Council, the task force had 3 bills that were signed into law. Those bills repealed kind of obsolete language, exempting mineral pools from certain regulations, limiting DEQ's rulemaking abilities for programs in which it maintains primacy from the federal government. Also signed into law, a bill co-sponsored by my fellow Senate Democrat and member of the Management Council, Senator Rothfuss, which provided contractors throughout the state licensing reciprocity within localities. This interim, so far, the task force was formed again only by the feed bill from last session. The task force began its final interim meetings in Jackson Hole to witness how it has been providing solutions to affordable housing crisis and other problems facing our resort community. At that meeting, the task force was also requested multiple bill drafts to attempt to offer statewide solutions to spur affordable housing. The task force met again in Casper in mid-July to discuss these bill drafts and provide recommendations on housing-related bill drafts being considered by the Joint Corporations Committee. The one bill favorably recommended to corporations was not sponsored by the committee for the 25 general session. No bills were passed by the task force at the Casper meeting, but 2 working groups were formed to amend bills for the full task force consideration at their next meeting. On the energy front, the task force received multiple updates from the Joint Minerals Committee. This spurred the task force to recommend that the committee pursue legislation on the nuclear energy front. They did that and sponsored 1 bill draft for the legislature's consideration when it convenes in January. When the full task force met again last month, it forwarded 2 bill drafts to the Joint Appropriations Committee, one easing building code restrictions for multifamily complexes and other modifying zoning protest petition process. Say that one 3 times quickly. The latter was a recommendation of the task force received from the Harvard Growth Lab last interim in the governor's office. As this interim comes to a close, the task force work is not done. It will meet again for a half-day virtual meeting on the afternoon of Tuesday, November 19th. It's in the afternoon because I think it conflicts with Revenue Committee, as I recall. The task force will consider 4 bill drafts at that meeting. 1, creating a timeline for requirements for localities and issuing building permits. 2, creating a timeline for requiring localities reviewing site plans, subdivision reviews, plats, and zoning reviews. And 3, third bill, limiting the extent to which local government can impose mitigation fees or exactions on developments. And the fourth, a ban on governments imposing construction moratoriums within certain guidelines. We would welcome your feedback on those drafts, some of which are appended to the report in your packet, and look forward to working with you, the entire legislature, and the governor to see them become law. Thank you for authorizing this task force and to its members for the work these past 2 interims. And I'd be happy to stand for any questions that you might have.
Go, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And as I look at these 3 bill drafts, it looks to me like you probably increase regulation, not decrease regulation. And the first one, zoning protest petitions. I really, I have a problem with that because now it will require 50% of the land in an area for a petition, basically a petition to and I think before it was 20%. And I realized that the amount of distance was changed. But I don't necessarily believe that's a good idea. I think the other one has probably served us well enough. There may have been isolated problems with it. I'm not keen on the single stairwell. I think if you have 5 floors, you probably better have 2 stairwells or people could die on them, particularly in our smaller areas where they don't have those big ladder trucks. So I really don't understand that bill either. The last bill, residential building permit timeline requirements, I think that one's fine. It kind of forces the creation of some timelines, which will require more regulation. But I think that one's probably a good idea. So I'm less than enthused. I won't be here, so it won't matter, but I'm less than enthused about the bills that came forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would never disagree with the good speaker. I would say that the protest petition bill, what was the attempt there was to take that out of the statewide realm, state law, and put it to local control and give some guidance about that, about how it can be achieved. The operative point was to get it out of the state hands and get it more towards local control. The stairway bill, I think if you read and look at the whole thing, and I know Representative Yen, who's also a member who serves with distinction on the task force, brought forth that recommendation. It's an attempt to try to ease the cost for developers in certain situations. I think he can explain it better than I can. The other bill was, the timeline bill. Timeline bill, actually, that was a bill that had wide support in the committee. And the feeling was to, we sent out and ask our friends at WHAM to send out to all cities and towns, how long does it take to turn a building permit? The resulting information we got back was exactly the same, 30 days. We mentioned that to a few contractors around communities around the state, and we got varied responses. Some were less than enthusiastic about the truthfulness of that statement, let's just say. So what we're trying to do is if that's the goal, if that's what cities and towns feel they can do, we wanted to try to just put together put some sideboards up so they can show us that they can do that. So that was the attempt. But we all know, and those of us who've been on city councils know that building permits are not all created equal. And so trying to get a timeline together where a timeline can match the complexity of what's being asked is what we're attempting to do with that bill. And I think we hit the mark.
Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I agree. The last bill's fine. I think it gives people control, to local entities control to create those timelines. I just don't know how much good it'll do in the bigger picture of trying to create housing for people in Wyoming.
So, Mr. Chairman, again, as the good senator said, I do serve on the Regulatory Reduction Task Force. So the protest petition one of the options that we had actually talked about on the task force, and maybe will come up again when it goes to full interim committee, was the idea of just striking the protest petition statute altogether, and that would still leave it within local control. So if a town or county wanted to create a protest petition process on their own, they could still do it. They don't need statute to do that. What striking it from statute would have allowed is them to have whatever process they want. The reason that the protest petition statute has changed is for the most part because what was told to us was that this ends up creating uncertainty for developers, the protest petition process, because it's already gone through the 3 readings for zoning, and then at the last minute after the 3rd reading, someone can come forward with a protest petition and throw the whole thing out of whack. And so that uncertainty for developers creates additional costs. With the single staircase one, I think I'm excited for it to go to a full committee because there are members nationally that have statistics on cities that have that single staircase rule now, and they actually have less fire deaths than they do in places without the single staircase rule. So I'm excited for that data to come forward too.
Further testimony?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kinski.
Senator Grew, if I like the first one, I like all of them, but in particular on the first one, and this would be for the committee when it goes to it, but I would just, if I had one change to make, it would be to say that if there is an owner of a property that has previously agreed to annex when the city is contiguous to them, that's binding upon subsequent owners of the property if it's been recorded. There's some uncertainty in this law. It started with Gillette, and we had the same problem in Sheridan. People want water and sewer service, and we say, well, you're 100 feet outside city limits. Sign this agreement that when we get there and you're contiguous, you'll annex in. You get there and they say, well, I don't want to be inside the city. They just signed the protest for annexation, and the lawyers tell us probably nothing you can do about it. And so then that creates a disincentive to allow people to hook into the water and the sewer. So we took to recording them, and hopefully that would bind on future owners of the property, but that would be a nice little add to this thing, because that's a big issue in terms of just trying to even up the borders of the city. You extend the consideration to people to get on water and sewer, and then they don't want to annex in. That'd just be a nice little add. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further comments?
Mr. Chairman? Through you, Senator Kinski, that I appreciate that, and I think that's a good catch. The good news is that we're recommending to send these bills to appropriations, so I think you're going to have a direct hand in that come December 1st, or December 9th.
There you go. So I'll make a couple comments. My co-chairman talked about period we increased regulations. And, at some point, you do increase regulations to actually lower cost burdens of building and occupancy. And I think that's part of what this committee looked at. I applaud your efforts. I sat in for part of the last year and followed it previous. And it's pretty apparent that a big part of our building costs are driven by some of these regulations. And it takes further regulations, ironically, to actually make a way through that. And that was, when we formed this, that was one of my big goals, is so many of these regulations are driven really strictly within city limits and towns. And when you get into rural areas, the shoe just doesn't fit the same size. And so I applaud your look at going back to local control on, and some reduced regulations. I represent you, and I like the numbers on the stairwell end of it. Is if you do your research and you're worried about living on the 5th floor in a town that has a fire truck that can make it through 1 floor in a ladder, maybe you shouldn't live on the 5th floor. I tend to be a little bit of the old caravat emptor. You ought to look out for yourself, and we really don't need, in particular where you're not affecting your neighbors, we really don't need some of these rules and regulations. I kind of wish we'd got a little more regulatory and rolled some more of it back. But I really applaud your efforts. You folks learned how difficult it is to actually roll back rules and regulations. Most of them are there for a reason, and they're really hard to do a lot with them. So with that, I thank you for your efforts, and we'll let you continue on your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been interesting. I think one of the things, I think everyone who serves, and you serve, and Representative Yin serves, I think one of the things we found is, the state, despite what the Harvard Growth Lab said, we feel like in a lot of respects, there aren't a lot of regulations. There's a lot of zoning there's a lot of zoning in communities that really is just reflective of what's on the ground there now. And so it in and of itself is restrictive for higher density development, just because the folks have just laid down a zoning map that basically mirrors what's there now. Might be just a small house on a very big lot. So, it's really, it's a local issue that, then the question becomes, does the state want to try to help? We talked a lot about ARU bills or ADU bills, allowing people to add an accessory dwelling unit onto their home virtually automatically. Well, the cities and towns had some issues with that, and folks in cities and towns had issues with it. We heard a lot, so we kind of poked the bear one way. It reminds me a lot of the tax exemption reduction task forces that we've had around here over the years. Every time we initiate one, we always add more exemptions. And so it seems like we always start with the best of intentions. But this committee has tried its best to try to get to that goal, it has seemed to move into the housing area. Frankly, in agriculture, we looked and people didn't say we had many problems there, we had many issues, and so we kind of fell back. In the energy space and in the housing space is kind of where our work has been. And once again, every time we seem to try to go one way, we seem to get told that we can't, or we start getting told about the issues with that. So a lot of these questions will be very interesting to see how the body at large takes these up in the next session. We'll be interested to see.
We have one. Mr. Garrett, welcome.
Thank you, members of the committee. Mr. Chairman, Richard Garrett. I'm a resident of Cheyenne, and I'd like to wear two hats today. One is speaking on behalf of Habitat for Humanity, and we applaud the work of the Regulatory Reduction Task Force in regards to unearthing ways to make housing more affordable in this state, something that's critical. Everybody on this committee understands that, appreciates it, and is working towards a common goal. So we very much appreciate that. Taking that hat off for a moment, if I may, I live here in Cheyenne, as I mentioned, live in a building that's 5 stories tall. It was built in 1965. It's fire resistant because it's largely concrete construction. It has 2 stairwells. The stairwells are less than 20 feet apart, and neither stairwell is more than 20 feet from the exit of a resident. So the building is extraordinarily safe. I think that and Mr. Co-Chair Summers, I think your point is extraordinarily well taken. We cannot diminish life safety as a priority in the name of reducing regulations. And yet at the same time, since these regulations were put into effect on a statewide basis, there are other regulations that have enhanced security and safety in buildings, including, but not limited to, fire detection and fire suppression systems. In the case of our particular building, we would like to have the opportunity to use one of our stairwells as an alternate chase, if you will, to install an upgraded HVAC system. Our HVAC system is of a design of the 1960s, and its replacement will cost up to $500,000. If we're able to use that redundant stairwell, if you will, as a method to install a more up-to-date HVAC system, it would save our homeowners association a considerable amount of money while not in any way diminishing the safety of the people that live in the building. So I'm confident that we can explore ways that address the issues that Mr. Co-Chair Summers, Representative Summers raised, because it's extraordinarily valid in some communities. And I'd ask the committee to allow this bill to continue to move forward. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Richard, for your comments, and I think I appreciate it. And I know the committee has worked very hard to work on all these issues, and I would be remiss at this time if I didn't thank the folks at WAM, County Commissioners Association, the Business Alliance, all the folks who not only contributed members to the task force, but contributed their time and really tried to work these bills and try to do so in a very collaborative effort. That part was very, very gratifying. Also, want to thank our staff. Hank, who's here for his last day, before he goes on to bigger and better things, has been an invaluable help to us. Everyone on the staff, everyone on the team has been great at LSO to help empower us to do our job, and so we really appreciate their help.
Further comments, anyone? really a huge thank you. You folks went above and beyond, and thank you. Okay, and next up will be the Mental Health and Vulnerable Adults Task Force. I'm going to make an announcement before then. We are going to move the last agenda item, number 10, Revisers Bill, till tomorrow. So if any of you are hanging around in angst waiting for the Revisers Bill, we'll move it till tomorrow. I know it's important to a lot of people. And we'll replace it with an executive session at the end of the day today. So if you're hanging for the revisers, get your motel room booked. It'll be tomorrow.
Yeah, did anyone travel for the revisers bill?
Representative Larson, do we have your co-chair online, or is it just you?
No, it's just me.
So Representative Larson is a longstanding member of this committee. I want to give you our heartfelt gratitude for what all you've done. You guys have done a lot, and I'm going to give you the floor and turn you loose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Management Council. I appreciate the opportunity to present our report for the 2024 interim for the Mental Health and Vulnerable Adult Task Force. Senator Fred Baldwin and I, as the good chairman alluded to, chair the task force, which was first created in 2023, and then per this council's direction was continued during this 2024 interim. The task force is made up of 3 senators, Senator Nethercott, who's on Management Council, 3 House members, the good speaker, the good chairman of Zwanitzer, and myself. Then the directors from the Department of Health, Department of Corrections, Department of Family Services, and then a designee from the Department of Education, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court make up the task force. Being made up of the legislative, judicial, and executive branches, members, it's really given the task force a unique ability to tackle mental health from the perspective of all 3 levels of state government. But because it is made up of the 3 levels, the 3 branches of state government, it requires any legislation that we propose to go to a standing committee. Last year, I think the department, or the Labor and Health Committee, took 1 or 2, and then the judicial took the remainder of those. And this year we'll have 2 in judiciary tomorrow, and 1 in education next week, and then there's 1 that Senator Barlow and I will carry as a personal bill. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, you'll recall that we've really been focusing our efforts over the last couple of years in 4 areas. One is the diversion of people who have mental illness and have committed a misdemeanor away from the court system and into treatment. The other is identifying the services that vulnerable adults around the state have available to them and what should be available to them. Then the adolescents with high behavioral needs, and then mental health services in K-12. Last year, the most of our work was done on the adolescents with high behavioral needs, where we put out an RFI and have identified that the gap in our system, even with in our system, is that there are certain kids with acute behavioral needs that can't receive services at home or within the system we have, and it's difficult to find a long-term placement for them, and that the state really should be prepared to handle from 10 to 15 of those at any one time for up to 6 months, 7 months, until long-term care can be found for them someplace. We put out an RFP and are working. We set aside some ARPA money this last year to do a pilot program of about 6 kids to learn what we don't know on how to handle something like this, to make sure that we're not doing something that that can be done someplace else. One of the questions that came up on that this year was, why aren't more of the providers in our system taking these kids with high behavioral needs now? we reached out to them, and one of the concerns they expressed was the difficulty they have in getting insurance. When you have these kids that have these type of behaviors, sometimes their insurance won't cover them. So that was our focus on that particular topic this year, and what we found out was yes, that indeed is correct. Insurance companies are reluctant to insure for those challenges, and one of the things that and that really doesn't change moving forward, other than if we could find a way that they could cover, then could they take more of these acute kids? So do we give them cover in the Governmental Claims Act? Those are some thoughts we've had and that we might toy with looking at whether that is a good or not a good idea if this task force is continued this next year. The other thing that we talked about last year that we didn't do a lot with this year was the pilot program. We put the pilot program for diverting people who have mental illness and have committed a misdemeanor away from the judicial system if they'll go into treatment. The pilot program in Campbell County is going well. It really does take a while to get that moving, and the judiciary are now, the judicial branch is now looking at, if they haven't already, implementing a second pilot program in Natrona County. One of the things, though, that we did identify is we had treatment court statutes already in existence, but you'll recall this last session, we moved those out of the Department of Health over to Judiciary. And then with the creation of this new diversion treatment court, there was a need to get those statutes into the current treatment court statutes, and then to update and conform the existing statutes. And so we have one treatment court bill that it's 25 LSO 0103 that the Judiciary Committee will hear tomorrow. The majority of our time this year, Mr. Chairman, was on vulnerable adults. We looked at that last year and really kind of just peeled back the onion and realized just how little we knew about vulnerable adults and the services available to them and the services that they received and where they could receive those services. This year, as we started out, we had the Department of Health and Department of Family Services put a matrix together that showed all of our current programs that provide services to this population. And as you can imagine, the more acute the behaviors are, such as somebody with developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities, would probably receive more of these services that we see through the community providers versus perhaps an elderly person who has been exploited in a community. And so we looked at those, and the question was what policy should we adopt to say what services should a vulnerable adult be able, should they expect to be able to receive at any community in the state, and then how can we deliver that? The 6 areas of all of the stuff that we looked at, the 6 areas that we think really have value to see how the state in part or in whole can contribute to is temporary housing. So when you have a vulnerable adult, and it's important to remember that a vulnerable adult isn't an old guy like me that can't function or is because of mental capacity is maybe not making the right decisions. This could be a 21-year-old individual too who has some capacity challenges and can be exploited or otherwise abused. And so when that person is identified, are they safe? And how do we keep them safe until we can find more permanent housing? The second thing we looked at is food. We really do a pretty good job at that. We don't think that we need to expand it, but we need to maybe enhance and reallocate our resources to expand out further into the communities and to focus on those vulnerable adults. Temporary medical care, so when you find somebody that's, living in Farson and out away from town and hasn't been taking care of yourself, and you find that they need medical help, to make sure that that happens through the agency until maybe a more permanent source, whether it be Medicaid or some other source, can be provided. Transportation, and you get into Casper and Cheyenne, they kind of have some programs, but if you're up in the northeast part of the world, getting people to their doctor appointments, which may be 50 or 60 miles away, is difficult. And they may not have the resources. And so we've looked at the transportation program. AARP has done a great job of helping us look at those programs that are available through YDOT, and how do we better coordinate that with state funds and even reimburse community members that are willing to take people to meet those medical needs. Case management, we lack on that. The Department of Family Services really has adult protective services, and in case management, once you find somebody to make sure that they're getting the services they need, lacks, and then someone who cares. So do they have a guardian? And if there's not a guardian, should a guardian be appointed for them? But we just haven't funded that through Department of Family Services. And with the ARPA money, I think we had $200,000 that we set aside, and has really, with Guardian Services of Wyoming, it has really proved beneficial. And so that's probably something you'll see in a budgetary ask, is to maintain that funding so that we can provide guardianships to where those people won't be exploited and can be directed to appropriate legal advice when they find that they're in that need. So that was our vulnerable adult, and again, I think we're getting that file down to where some of the rough edges are off and some policy decisions are going to be made. The only bill that will come out of that this year is a bill that was, you'll recall a couple of years ago, we had advanced healthcare directives where we put into statute for people to give those directives when they become incapacitated. There will be a personal bill to amend that to include directives on dementia. There's a fair argument to say that our current language would allow that. There's also a fair argument to say it doesn't. So if we want to do that directive to include dementia, that seems to be something that is the Alzheimer's Association has supported, and we think is a good idea that you'll see during the session. Then K-12 funding, we looked at that last year, and then we refined that more this year. And the idea, the recommendation in working with the Department of Education is we really had concerns that we didn't want to turn our school district into mental health providers. We continue to expand what they have to do. And so we're recommending a policy, and the Department of Education agrees with, that school districts should be able to screen or identify somebody with a mental health issue, to stabilize them, and then to refer them. Now, with that comes, so how do we do that? And where do they get the services? Where are we going to refer them to? And that is a challenge, but in making sure that the parents are involved in all of those decisions, and that it's not a district decision to refer them. They identify the issue, consult with the parents, and then even can share with the parents where services were available. But then it really needs to be a decision of the family on getting there. But then what services are available in the community is an important thing to get established, and for school districts, telehealth and some other things that will kind of help do that. We looked at two programs that we thought would really be beneficial to help in the K-12 model. And one was to help the members of the school district, the faculty within the school, be able to help identify and screen and control the environment when somebody with a mental outburst or behavioral outburst comes into play. And there is a acronym BARR, B-A-R-R, Building Assets and Reducing Risk, which has proven to be a very effective model for building that capacity within school districts. We were recommending as a task force that we fund that for school districts. It's one-time funding. It takes 3 years to do in each school district, and then it should have enough training that you move yourself forward. Some of the school districts around the state got a jump start on that and used some of their extra money, and I think that we have 6 schools that are going to do that. As the Department of Education met with districts, there was a little bit of reluctance to say, will this really work? And it's a fair question. And so rather than bring a bill forward this session that would fund that model, we're going to recommend that we gather the data from those schools that do implement it to verify that it works, and then see what other schools are interested in, and then we'll request that appropriation at a future time. Now, during the COVID, or with some of the ARPA money, I should say, the Department of Education created a program called AWARE, which was to really go along well with what BARR done, is to they had a coordinator within the school that would help identify when somebody with a mental health challenge was identified, then to contact the parents, contact resources, and make referrals and help the parents and the student walk through that process if they so desired. The Department of Education recommended that we implement that program statewide in all of the school districts. So that will be, we're going to do that we're going to recommend that be done in a stepped approach. It would be an annual addition to the Department of Education's, a biannual appropriation of about $11 million, about 5.5, 5.8 a year. And so we want to do a pilot this first year, or this current biennium that we're in, and that will be a bill that will come through the Department of Education. And we're going to take some of that, the money that was set aside in our last budget, the $10 million, to help cover this current fiscal year's cost of implementing AWARE, and then fund the second fiscal year of the biennium to get that implemented, and then make that part of the standard budget request that can then be adjusted depending on the data that we gather. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, be happy to take any questions, but I would just conclude with 3 things. Mental health challenges are not going away. The second thing is that I think we've really made significant strides in laying the policy foundation to establish the role of the state in providing services to the citizens of the state for mental health. I think that's probably the biggest thing we're trying to do, is say, what is the role of the state here, rather than, as referred to earlier, throwing spaghetti against the wall. Maybe that was in SLIB that we heard that. And then the last thing is, as we've worked on laying this foundation, and it seems like, we're now laying like the second or third course of bricks on that foundation, And as we go around there, we're identifying where windows and where doors and some other things go. And we don't have it completely figured out yet. And I would just suggest to you that the work of the task force has value, and that to continue to make sure that we're staying on top or ahead of this to some degree would encourage consideration of continuing this task force moving forward to some degree. As I've met in some conferences this year with legislators from around the country, Maryland, California, Utah, others, they ask how we've been able to get the number of things done that we have on mental health. It was really surprising. They're focusing on one little component, and we seem to be focusing more holistically on statewide policy and the citizens as a whole. And for that, I'm pleased. I know there's a lot of work to do. So, Mr. Chairman, happy to address or try to answer any questions that members might have.
Questions, committee? Senator, Representative Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curiously, Representative Larson, are there numbers that give us a current indication of how many vulnerable adults Wyoming is really kind of dealing with? Or have you had in through your sources or anything, kind of the numbers we're dealing with, the numbers that were, kind of the dollar numbers or anything like that we're seeing develop? Is it growing?
Thank you. The short answer is no. When Representative Summers brought this to the task force, and really, I don't think we realized how little we knew. And really, it is, there's challenges out there that we heard from communities that aren't being met. The Department of Family Services, where Adult Protective Services lies, we just have not really, it's kind of like buying a fishing pole, but we didn't get the reel and didn't put, we don't have anything else with it. We've got this program, but we really haven't implemented it really well. And so what has happened is, if somebody in the community finds out that Lloyd's living home alone and it looks like he's hoarding and hasn't taken the garbage out for 5 years and certainly hasn't showered for even longer, that they're concerned that Department of Family Services sends somebody in to look at that, and then what? Then what do we do? Do they have rights as an adult? If Lloyd wants to be a hoarder and not take a shower, he has that right. But if he's really incapacitated and his kids have taken all of his savings and somebody else has taken all of his vehicles and then that's another thing, right? And we're just trying to ensure that those services are available. In what we did here, though, Representative Nyman, is, I think, Wyoming guardianships who provide guardianships for juveniles and for adults felt that we were maybe serving, there is a greater need than perhaps who are serving is, but actual data and numbers we don't, and don't really have a means to gather that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I think Chairman Larson really hit the nail on the head here. It's the guardianship. So, what role does the state have? Well, once the courts step in, we probably have a role, right, of some kind. And that's where the guardianship is. You got to be able to provide some guardianship so they have some representation for a period of time. And then you also have the issue where if DFS finds an individual that is clearly in danger from the home they're in, perhaps from the people that are in the home with them, then do you have the ability to move them overnight for a couple of nights to try to, take care of that until you figure out the broader issue of what should happen to them? And so I think trying to figure out what those costs are and how many of those is really a tough issue. I think the guardianship thing's a little easier because of the ARPA program, there's kind of at least a bit of knowledge of what's out there that needs to go through a guardianship program.
And Mr. Chairman, I would just follow up with that. The Department of Family Service Director Schmidt also noted that of all of the programs that they have with youth and, with foster care and guardianships and things, Adult Protective Services has a great potential of interacting with community-based services, volunteers, churches, family members, and developing that system as well. And we heard that really well from Mr. Lakehawk on transportation. There's a program, if Chip Nyman's willing to take cranky old Mr. Larson to see the doctor over 20 miles away, that, and we'll do that regularly, there's actually a program that will reimburse him for that, and yet but we just haven't ever really implemented that to the level that we probably could.
Mr. President, so Representative Larson, you may not have used these words, but I got the impression that one of your goals is to make sure the mental health services that are provided are evidence-based so that you're getting some bang for your buck. Is that a fair statement?
So, yes, short answer, yes. The governor's had, Representative Stith, I think 3 of these mental health summits. And on the first summit in Casper, we had a lot of the nonprofits and volunteers and just, people that are passionate about trying to figure out this mental health thing. And they just says, what do we need to do? How do we do it? Let's go, let's get her done and let's go. And we kind of had to throw a little water on it and say, we really don't have a policy. Let's establish what is our role for providing these services. What are the needs on all of this stuff? And that's really probably the best work that the task force has done, is getting that refined to where they can say, here is the role of the state in part, or perhaps in whole, like the adolescent kids. But then where can you use the community resources that we perhaps would argue have historically been out there, but, or in addition to that, is that really the role of the state? Sometimes there's questions saying, well, I appreciate that. Should the state be providing counseling services for every man, woman, and child in the state? I don't think so. Or should school districts be community mental health providers?
President, follow up? So Representative Larson, I think it sounds like the goal there is to not just have sort of a solution, but one that's maybe uniquely tailored to Wyoming's culture so that we don't overdo it. And just as a short anecdote, just yesterday, as I was on my way here, I left my office, I was in a hurry to get to my vehicle, and I walked past a man who was just asleep, lying on the sidewalk, and it was about 34 degrees out, and the temperature was dropping. And I kept walking initially, and then I thought to myself, well, this is not New York City. We just don't let people just lie on the street when it's cold and might really have something bad happen to them from exposure. So I came back to the guy and, asked him how he was doing, right? Is he in trouble? Does he need help? And of course, he was very irritated with me. He said he just wanted to sleep. He's extremely upset that I bothered him, right? And the upshot of that was, I initially left him alone, but then I checked into the local police department just to have them do a welfare check on him, which they did about 15 or 20 minutes later. But what occurred to me was, we do take care of our own. We want to, especially if you've got this situation where someone's out exposed to the elements in what is getting close to wintertime. And yet at the same time, we don't want to establish a huge bureaucracy that's unnecessary. So I guess it seems like that's the challenge your group is dealing with, is how to tailor this so we're not just throwing money at something, but to get something that's effective.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in addition to that, there's some complexities and challenges that we all recognize as legislators in Wyoming, and that's the 40 miles or 80 miles between communities. And within 120 miles, maybe only having one hospital, or just that distance in small population, and then having those services. When we talk about K-12 or funding for mental health, well, all we need to do is just put more counselors in the school districts, or just get more counselors in the communities. Fine, where are you going to find them? They're not out there. They're not there to put in the school districts. They're not there to, we have some real challenges in Wyoming.
Public comments, any? Mr. Laycock, while he's on his way, a huge thank you, Representative Larson, and to Senator Baldwin, who I was going to give a go away to, is thank you. I realize how many hours have been put in on this committee by you folks. It's not unnoticed. So, Mr. Laycock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom Laycock, AARP, Wyoming. I just wanted to offer an attaboy to this particular committee. We followed it for the last 2 years. We've done quite a bit of deep dive on a topic that's really, really complex when it comes to vulnerable adult, because you've got that question. You've got people wanting to live independently, having the freedom to do whatever it is, that they live however they want to do it. But also, bigger than that, you've got this question of how do you help people live in their home as long as they possibly can, and what services exist, and where are the gaps? And so this group really did a tremendous job of digging into that. Everything from available guardianships all the way down to transport. How do we get someone to the doctor? How do we get someone to the grocery store? And so I just wanted to say thank you very much to the committee. Wanted to say thank you to the Management Council last year for re-upping this particular committee. And, for future Management Council, maybe give another shot, another interim, because we feel like we're digging deep into some pretty important stuff. So thank you much.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Laycock? Further public comment? Public comment is closed. Committee, I think no further action. Thank you, Representative Larson. Safe travels. Okay, it's time for lunch. No. Report from Select Committee on Legislative Facilities, Technology, and Process. Representative Zwanitzer, do you want to go to the front? And is Senator Case going to get on, or is it just you, Representative Zwanitzer?
Senator Case said he was not able to make it today.
Very good. So once again, we'll thank him for his service.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of Management Council, to provide your report from Facilities Tech and Process. We did have 2 meetings. I know you've read a little bit in the press about some of them. So today we have 3 different policies and 2 joint rules to bring before you in the minutes. And I'm certainly joined by Director Obrecht and Ms. Rivale on explaining any of the 3 policy changes. I would say that they're not substantive on the 3 policy changes. They're more cleanup, but I'd be happy to walk you through each one. First one up on our agenda is Policy 8.1, Floor Ceremonies in the Senate and the House. If you pull this up, I would call this a cleanup. You'll see in subsection 2 on the approval of ceremonies. Right now, our rules say that we don't schedule special events not less than 2 months prior to the upcoming legislative session. I believe LSO will tell you that it has truly been on a case-by-case basis, and we have not held true to that 2 months reservation when there are groups that would like to visit the Capitol or floor ceremonies, et cetera. It has been on a case-by-case basis. And the only other change in that policy, Mr. Chairman, is taking out the legislative information officer and just saying coordinated by LSO. And so it's not specific, but it's broader to the LSO in general. I'd be happy to entertain any comments from the director to my left on those policies.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think Representatives Wanser have covered it.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, or maybe Director, if I'd be correct, do you want to approve these one by one? Would that be the rest? So I guess I would ask for a motion if there are no discussion on Management Council Policy 8-1.
So move.
For completeness. Okay.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Management Council Policy 0801, floor ceremonies is passed. We are on to Management Council Policy 10-01, media credentialing and conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Management Council Policy 10-1 is on media credentialing. You'll see there's only one even slightly substantive change in 1C. We're taking out the credentials will not be issued to individuals for the purpose of writing a personal online blog. And so for those of us who've been here for a while, about 8-10 years ago, we did have an assortment of people coming in one session saying that they were a journalist. And we have struggled with this question probably for the 20 years I've been here on who is truly a journalist. Do they have to have credentialing? Do they have to be part of a society, or do they have to subscribe to a code of ethics? And it has been difficult to say, you are in fact a journalist, person A, but person B, you are not. And we did have people who, when this policy was created, we actually had certain rooms where the journalists would write stories, would have access to, electricity, Wi-Fi, et cetera, and there was only so many spaces. And so it got to be when certain people are saying, well, I read an online blog, I should have access to the media rooms, et cetera. That is no longer the case, and so this policy, I would submit to you, is outdated. The only other two parts of that are reusing your badge every year. LSO does keep an up-to-date list, and you have to re-credential each year. And then at the very bottom on 7, again, instead of the specific information officer, it just says the LSO provides that role. Instead of a specific person, it would be the LSO as a whole. So they don't have to title someone this specific information officer. And I'd be happy to turn it over to Director Obrecht for some cleanup.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would say that Representative Wanser did a commendable job with that explanation. I would possibly just add that we are already guided by, when we credential a person as a member of the media, subsection 1A, which defines members of the media for purposes of this policy. And it was just Tamara and I's feeling, and the select committees agreed that C no longer added anything of value to that definition in A.
I would move that we approve the two changes to Management Council Policy 10-01 as presented.
I'm not doing public comment. Public comment? Seeing none. Been moved. It's not been seconded.
I'll second it if it's
Second.
already had public comment.
Any more comment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Management Council Policy 10-01, media credentialing criteria and conditions is passed. We are on Management Council Policy 12-04, public decorum in galleries, lobbies, and committee rooms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleased to bring you 12-4. Now you see the substantive changes there in 1D.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I had a change proposed on Management Council Policy 10-01, media credentialing.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, your change is to a proposed rule. And maybe if you wouldn't mind, would we handle these and then we'll go back to that?
Okay, super.
I think it would just be, it'll be worthy of longer discussion and on another time.
Okay,
Perfect.
super.
We'll get
Thank
to
you.
it, Senator Kinski. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bet.
We're back on 1204, public decorum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very quickly on 1D, you'll see it says signs, banners, placards, and other display materials are prohibited in the galleries. I would turn it over to Director Obrecht, but the overall feeling is right now you're not seeing people with banners, but you are seeing people with messages on their clothing, with pins, buttons, et cetera. And we have had some issues over the past biennium on where do we draw that line between free speech, political speech, and when it becomes a sign, a display, a placard, or a message. And so if I could, Mr. Chairman, turn over to Director Obrecht to give you some examples and the reason this policy is coming forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During the last legislative session, the Sergeant of Arms in the Senate was asked by a member of the Senate to request or to remove a member of the public from the gallery who was wearing a shirt that was from a lobbying organization, a group that had a political agenda and wanted to see a political outcome. The shirt was undoubtedly designed to get noticed by members of the floor. There was no suggestion that this member of the public was acting in any sort of disruptive manner or trying to get anyone's attention on the floor of the Senate beyond wearing that shirt. So the Sergeant of Arms did speak to that person, nicely asked if they would cover that shirt up, and then could come back into the gallery. When I was made aware of this situation, Tamara and I again talked. We did some research on it, and while it is certainly not a established area of the law, we felt that we may be potentially violating some First Amendment protections if we ask a person to leave the Senate gallery simply for what article of clothing they're wearing. And it gets incredibly complicated when you start trying to police what people wear. An example I've used in the Select Committee and at other times is, what if you're discussing a bill on law enforcement retirement and members of the Police Association or the Sheriff's Association or the Highway Patrol Association come to view the proceedings in uniform? And they're there to hear it. They're obviously there to lend their support or their opposition to whatever you're considering, and that article of clothing they're wearing delivers a message. And there are other instances where you could see where everyone would be in the gallery wearing a Vote No on House Bill 10 t-shirt. And they would definitely be trying to sway the discussion on the floor in that instance. Are they allowed to do that under the First Amendment or not? I don't think the federal courts have come with a clear, definitive answer on that. But the further we go down this road, the more likely we are to be sued and to potentially lose that lawsuit. So that's, while we grappled with what would be the best change, do you say that you can wear a message? We don't think so, because we think that if a message is obscene or vulgar, you do have that authority to ask someone to leave. We could also impose a content neutral dress policy, as the US Congress does. That we could say that you had to wear business attire or business casual attire to come into the gallery. I don't know if that's what the legislature wants to do, if it wants to limit that access to only those who come to meetings or come to view the legislature in business formal or business casual attire. So this is what we came up with. I would say moving forward, what this policy does gives the presiding officers, the sergeant at arms, and the legislative service office the ability to make a case-by-case determination. And hopefully, we come up with the right answer. And I think that under this policy, in the situation that was presented to the Senate Sergeant at Arms, that was absolutely the right decision he made at that time. And he did it incredibly respectfully, and but I heard about it from members of the public after that.
Thank you, Mr. President. Matt, I guess my question would be, what were the comments that you heard from the public? What was the feedback? What direction did it go?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Nyman, the members of the public I heard from believed that the constitutional rights of that person who was asked to leave were violated. That's what they believed. I don't know personally whether that's true or not, but that was their concern, was that the Wyoming legislature was denying people the right to assemble and participate in their government.
For the comments committee. Public comment. Seeing none. We have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the Management Council Policy 12-4 amendments presented by the Select Committee.
Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? All those in favor of Management Council Policy 12-04, public quorum in galleries, lobbies, and committee rooms, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion is passed. We are on Joint Rule 14-1M amendments.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, these are joint rule recommendations that would have to go before both bodies and be approved by a majority of members within the first 5 days. The first we're bringing to you from Facilities Tech and Process regards amendments to the Mirror Budget Bill. The easiest way probably to explain it is to go all the way down, it's 14.1M. And if you go down to, Romanet 5, the very last sentence, a reading of the budget bill shall start not earlier than 24 hours after the deadline to approve amendments for that reading. So this is really, in this period, at least in the House, between committee of the whole and second reading, we would have an extra day for those amendments to be released by 10 a.m. that morning. So again, the same process that we traditionally have held. This clarifies that you can request an amendment for second reading anytime up to the reading of the first reading on COW of the budget. So currently the rules say 5 p.m. As you all know, at least in the House, there have been many occasions we have gone past 5 o'clock on first reading of the budget. And so we've changed that to say whenever, the 300 sections end, that is when you can no longer request a second reading amendment. Similar process to what we have. This says by, let me find the actual citation here in B, no later than 10 a.m. on the succeeding legislative working day, that amendment has to be approved. So again, it can be a somewhat conceptual amendment, waiting on the financial numbers, waiting on the correct wording or placement of where it should go, perhaps in the 300 section. So you can request it anytime up until COW ends, but you have to approve it by 10 a.m. the next morning. At that point, within 30 minutes to an hour, LSO would publish those, and members of the public, members of the legislature, lobbyist groups, et cetera, would have a full day to review all of those amendments, track them in, talk to people, et cetera, and we wouldn't start second reading for another 24 hours after 10 a.m. on, it'd be Wednesday on our current calendar then, but it would have a full day, which is different than we have done it in the past. So a couple of different things going on in the amendment to address those three issues on the end of the first reading, 10 a.m. being the hard stop, and then having a full 24 hours. This would not prevent us coming in earlier on, let's say the second day, you just couldn't start the budget until you got through second reading, third reading, procedural things. So it would, if the rule passed in its current form, not allow second reading until that 10 o'clock, a day after committee of the whole. I'd be pleased to have the director and LSO staff offer any further clarifications or rationale on that.
Mr. Chairman, I think he got it. I don't have anything else. Do you, Tamara?
Senator Roth.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And on the committee, we had a good discussion about this to provide better public understanding of amendments in the budget, as well as honestly legislators having more opportunity to read the amendments prior to then voting on them. I think we've all experienced that glorious opportunity to get your amendment and then for the first time read it about 7 minutes before you're voting on it. Good times. So it's trying to address that. And I think that's a positive. The one question I don't know how much we got into detail about, though, came up a little bit today, and that is the possibility of committee of the whole on the budget ending very, very late, let's say midnight. And then this effectively structures it such that you've got a requirement for approval by 10 a.m. the next day of the sponsor, which means it has to be drafted by 10 a.m. the next day. So you could literally, 10 a.m. So you could have a situation where you end up with 11:59 p.m. budget amendment requests that then staff has to have ready for approval by 10 a.m. the next day. We didn't talk that through. I don't remember talking that through on the committee. And the more I've thought about it since we first discussed it earlier in the day, I'm wondering if we need sort of the earlier of type line where we have a 6 p.m. hard cutoff on that, or 5 p.m. was the previous one, something along those lines, a hard cutoff on that last day of the committee of the whole, so that LSO can begin the drafting at 6 p.m. of all of the amendments or something along those lines. So I guess I'd ask Director Obrecht. I don't feel like we talked about that, so I just wanted to flesh that out of Management Council.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Roth, it's certainly a discussion we've had internally. And really what it does is it moves the workload for the amendment drafting to that evening rather than the day of. And it will just require a longer night than we've done in the past. But really, that will put pressure on us, but I think we can handle it. And the other thing, I would hate to have a shorter cutoff time, because then, somebody won't get to hear the explanation on a certain section of the bill. And until you do that, you might not know if you need an amendment on it or not. So I would say that I'm comfortable with the way this is drafted, and let's see how it goes for a year or two if it's adopted.
Chairman. Well, on that, the 10 a.m. is, on the second day, the approval timeline is a little bit arbitrary, but it's based on the idea of having, on the following day, you've got 24 hours lag between the cutoff time of 10 a.m., and then you couldn't start second reading of the budget until after 10 a.m. the following day. That is a little bit arbitrary, though, and there's nothing that says that couldn't be noon, for example. That would simply then mean that you couldn't start consideration of second reading or third reading of the budget until noon, which honestly, we never do that anyway. I don't remember starting in the morning. Typically, we end up doing morning business. It seems like, maybe I'm wrong, I guess I'd look to you two to correct me, but has it been both ways? Okay.
It's been both.
But this, there is the possibility of giving more hours to staff in the morning by having a noon cutoff instead of a 10 o'clock cutoff, that would effectively allow any of those final amendments that aren't quite done yet to be drafted. And I guess I'd just look to the director for any thoughts on that, and maybe the committee for thoughts on it. I just don't want to, it's all about that late night for LSO. I'm just worried that we might be really brutalizing staff there.
Director Olbrecht, and then I'll have a comment.
Mr. Chairman, twofold. I think first, my understanding of the select committee's directive was we want these amendments out as close as possible to 24 hours for the notice, So that was kind of my compromise that I brought to the select committee, was that 10 o'clock to be in, and then give LSO the ability to finalize those amendments for posting after that. And you might not have a full 24 hours. And what I was fully cognizant of as we were developing this rule is the trend within both the House and the Senate for more budget bill amendments and longer discussion on the budget bill amendments. And what we didn't want is to hold up the ability of the House or Senate to come in as early as they can, so they can get through all their second or third reading amendments in a day and not have to carry those over the second. So, we are well aware that this could be an imposition on staff that night, but of course, we'll be drafting the budget bill amendments during that time, ordering them, figuring out what needs to be conformed where. Really, the 10 o'clock approval time is nice, because once we get them all approved, once that deadline, then we can start conforming the amendments to the ones, it's a known universe at that point in time. So I asked Don, I've asked Ian. I think everybody is comfortable right now with that 10 o'clock deadline, knowing that we may want to revisit it in the future.
Okay, thank you. That's good for me.
Thank you. Yeah, you did a lot. This was a big push for me, and I think for transparency of the body, it's huge. I think a couple points to be made is, one, we've always been flexible with our rules. If you guys are behind, we've always flexed. I've done it myself, and we're willing to flex. Second, I think it provides a lot to staff when those have to get numbered, because what's really drug us off in the past is a bunch of them not numbered that you guys have to act on the go while you're actually trying to finish up amendments as we're voting on them. And so I think this is a huge step. It maybe reform some, but for the public out there and for our agencies, I think it's critical that they're allowed to have access to what's coming at them with more than 1 hour's notice. And I think this is an incredible first step for the legislature. I think it's probably one of the more significant things that we're going to do through this management council meeting, is to allow that to happen. And I think it'll change a little how our budget amendments happen, both on the floor and how people bring them. So I applaud you for the flexibility on it. We started out, and it's come where I think's really a workable solution and a good one. And I encourage the committee to strongly look at it, adopting it the way it is, and to do it. The last comment I have to make is we always can do amendments and changes on the fly by committee chairman, because that's the other loophole we've left in there, is committee chairman can still get outside of that rule, I believe. Is that correct, Director Olbrecht?
Appropriation chair.
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, wanted to make sure, because if we've got a hole or a problem you folks have, or we have, our approach chairs can fix that at this point, so. Further
President.
Senator.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to say, you said committee chairman, specifically Joint Appropriations Committee.
Chair.
And, chairman, and only, and this is kind of clarifying language, which you see on the second page, which is consistent with the original intent, but you say it indicates that the appropriations chair can only create amendments to correct errors identified in the bill and to transfer funds necessary to support the total appropriations contained in the bill. So it's based on correcting problems, not submitting new amendments outside of the standard clock window. I just think it's important that everyone understand that. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarification. Further comments,
Mr.
committee
President.
questions?
Mr. President,
Senator Kinski.
I think I'm going to hold back approval on this one. I just, you know, I can see some situations where it would help. I can see some situations where it might run counter. I just don't know that there's any substitute for leadership and taking these things on a case-by-case basis. Mr. President, you'll recall in the last, the 2 years of your leadership, you know, you kind of have a feel for the body, where they're coming from, you kind of get an idea of how many amendments are coming. And I think there were 2 times that you just announced to the body as to what the deadlines were going to be for amendments to be in. But you didn't do that unless you felt that it was necessary. Otherwise, we kind of proceeded the way we'd always proceeded. And I like that approach of leadership kind of assessing, feeling where things are, and you know, making a determination whether it was necessary to get those amendments in and revealed by a time certain. So I'm just going to hold off on this one. It may be great. I just can see some situations where it may not be exactly, the outcome may not be exactly what we want. I'm kind of content with the situation as we've got it now. So I'm going to withhold approval on this one, Mr. President. That's just where I'm coming from is all. I do agree they put a lot of work into it. This is the perennial debate about these amendments and what we should do to get them to drop sooner or later or not. Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Matt, I have a question, and it goes back to the amendment sponsored by the Chairman of Appropriations. In the old language, it was A and B, right? Amendments to correct errors, and then B, amendments sponsored by the Chairman of the Standing Appropriations Committee. Then now we're going to put those 2 together. I think it still stands alone. I don't think it's Chairman of Appropriations Committee only to correct errors. I don't believe I believe that because of the semicolon, or is it? No, the semicolon goes away too. And so this does substantially change what the Chairman of Appropriations can do. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, it certainly is correct that the chairman of the Joint Appropriations Committee used to have the ability to offer any amendment after that deadline that chairman wanted. And what the Select Committee wanted to ensure was that if you missed that 10 o'clock deadline, that you couldn't then go ask the chairman to sponsor your amendment for you. This is something that's happened quite a bit, and the fear was that it would get utilized and possibly abused even more with this 10 o'clock hard deadline.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, I don't support that provision. I guess if and when we work this, you know, I would try to amend that back to its original, the way it is. I believe the Chairman of Appropriations should be able to bring amendments, and they shouldn't all be just to correct errors or change the budgets, so.
We'll be open to that when it comes. I'll make a couple corrections off what went. So there's never been a ability of the presiding officers to set arbitrary times on that. I did it last year, praying and hoping that nobody challenged me on it. I'm going to be honest, that's the first time that had happened. I did it. I wanted to have that transparency. We ran a test on it. Director Olbrecht, I talked to him before I did it, but I had no authority to do it. Let's be really clear. It was, once in a while, you get to take the prerogative of the chair, and I used it. And if you get challenged, you get caught till the second round, which, by the way, the body did challenge it on the second round and shut me down. So that was kind of how it happened. And I've been one of the ones, I'm on a bender on it, is we hear transparency nonstop. And for us to work the budget, which I've sat on appropriations for months, and have the public be able to participate in public process and be a piece of it, and then our body goes in, and with 1 hour notice, we can absolutely eliminate an entire agency's budget by a budget footnote. I think is wrong and disrespectful to the agency and to the process. We really have a process in our budget footnotes that allows us to do unbelievable things. They require the approval of the body, but you can really do really damaging things to government without prior notice or public comment, which I keep trying to shut off. And so mine is, I'm going to continue to beat this drum as long as I'm around here, that both our agencies, our executive branch, and more than anything, our people have the chance to see what members are trying to do via budget amendments, because the other part is huge parts of them never make the press or get talked about because they get beat, and a lot of them do unbelievably crazy things. That's my opinion. It's no offense to members, but they do really detrimental things. So I encourage us to pass this. We can refine it more as we go on, but I think this is a great first step. Further comments?
I would just say again,
Chairman
Mr.
Devon.
Chairman, if management council approves it, would go following the joint rules, both houses would discuss and, have to vote affirmatively on it. And we discussed a little bit on the appropriations, Chairman, right? You don't want someone playing games and bringing in 8 amendments after the fact. But there are times, an amendment goes down by 1 vote, and something happens and you want to bring it back. It's a slippery slope to give one person that power. You can always suspend the rules, but there was a lot of conversation on, you want to trust that the appropriations chairman is fixing errors, making sure the budget flows correctly, but you don't want them bringing whatever they can be talked into as pet projects after the fact in a non-transparent way. But I do believe at that point, everybody would realize what's happening and there'd be some pushback. So it was a delicate area, and I don't disagree with the speaker that you need a catch-all there at the end. If something goes haywire and you miss an error and all of a sudden you're stuck with a budget, you need someone to be able to fix something last minute. You just don't want them to abuse that power. And so that is the very fine line that we didn't settle on very well in coming up with the language before you. But I don't have serious concerns if you want to delete that part out in an amendment and leave it the way it is.
Further comments? Comments? Seeing none. Public comment? Seeing none. Surprising. None. Is there a motion?
I'll move it.
Co-Chairman Summers has moved Joint Rule 14-1-M amendments. Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman, just so we're clear on what the motion is, it's a recommendation of the Joint Rules Committee of the 68th Legislature to propose this for adoption in the 68th Legislature.
Correct. Yes.
It's been moved, second.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Co-Chairman.
I'd propose an amendment on that line to go back to the original language on Romanet, let's see, Romanet 4, where you have A, and right now it strikes the semicolon and. I'd like to put the semicolon and back in, and then on large B, leave large B in there and leave amendments in there, so it will remain that amendments sponsored by the chairman of the Standing Appropriations Committee or his designee would be in order. So that would be my amendment.
I'll second that. Discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and against the amendment, I think this is a good original concept. The chairman of the Appropriations Committee already has more of a bite at the budget than any other member of the legislature. And in fact, it's challenging for other members of the legislature to really have access to the entire budget as it is right now. But at least they have mostly a fair shake in the amendment process, mostly. This doesn't happen very often, but it did happen, like the B provision happened in some of our early years in the Senate, but it really hasn't happened a lot
That would be the
in
Phil
recent
Nicholas
years.
years.
I wasn't going to name names.
I was.
And candidly, I find it inappropriate that we develop rules that elevate individual legislators over their colleagues. When it reaches the body, when it's in the Senate's hands, senators should have equal access to it. House members in the House should have equal access to it. And the idea that we give special privilege once it reaches the floor to one individual in each chamber is too much power for that individual. It can be very contentious from a, are you part of the right group that has favorability from that particular individual, or are you on the outside of that group? If you're on the outside, to hell with any of your amendments. If you're on the inside, your amendments get to roll. I don't think that's appropriate. Now, one other thing is, even though this is written as a joint rule, it could actually be individual chamber rules. We could divide this up very easily. This is not a required mirror bill process that is joint. We have some aspects of the joint rule that are. So if it does go forward, we could certainly do it two different ways if the Senate felt differently than the House. But I think this is a welcome approach. Once it gets into the hands of the body should have it in its hands. And if there is a need, if there is a compelling need, 2/3 of the body will suspend the rules. And that chairman can stand up and say, hey, this isn't a technical correction, but this is really a good thing. I'd ask that we suspend and introduce it at this time. And the body then gets to decide if 2/3 support that, then they have that opportunity. So they can be thinking about it, they can bring the emergency. But once it's in the body's hands, let's make sure all of the members of the body have equal access to amending it. We don't do that anywhere else.
So, Mr. Chairman, ultimately, the body rules, and whether the Appropriations Committee chairman, if he can proffer an amendment, but that doesn't mean it'll pass. I've actually seen Appropriation Committee chairman do this and proffer an amendment, and it died more than once. And so I think the body regulates that, but I think it allows, when there is a need and a necessity, it allows that Appropriations Committee chairman to propose an amendment. That doesn't mean it passes.
This process doesn't have anything about it getting flagged, though, as being past the deadline. And particularly with this process, there would be no indication. It's not even a high number anymore. It gets inserted into the budget in its appropriate place. No one knows the difference. So it is special privilege. It can be secret special privilege, as this is drafted. And as we change the rest of the process, it's even more empowering, because at least, and obviously we all do this, when it's a high number budget amendment and it's going halfway through the budget, we all notice that. And we're like, all right, who's doing what and what did they do at the last minute? The rest of this amendment changes that. The high number budget is the last 300 series budget amendment that's submitted. That's the only way you're going to be able to correlate budget amendment number with anything else is its position in the budget. So in the past, maybe the House recognized that and said, hey, you're trying to do something outside of the bounds. But, I see no necessity to give that special privilege. We don't give that special privilege anywhere else. And I don't see any barriers that this creates that can't be easily overcome by a compelling argument that persuades 2/3 of the chamber. Let's create equality in the chamber.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, in the end, the chairman of appropriation has to sign the amendment. You know who brought the amendment. And so it's fairly transparent who's bringing the amendment on what the issue is. So I don't think we want to eliminate this opportunity for the chairman of appropriations.
Comment?
We're on the amendment.
Yeah. Public comment? We're on the amendment. So the amendment is to go back to basically status quo on that the Appropriations chairman can bring it in. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it, the amendment has passed. We're back on the main amendment. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Amendment has passed. Joint Rule 14-1M, amendment has passed. Joint Rule 21-1C, draft. Chairman Zwanser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleased to present 21-1C. And so the policy difference, if you think of a committee, in a committee, you have a bill draft and you amend it all to heck. If it's so substantively amended, LSO has a couple of days to bring what we would call a substitute bill to the floor. And at that point, the members vote on a substitute bill because the original legislation was so heavily amended. The difficulty is if you have a host of amendments on first or second reading, this first happened, I think, in 2006 that I remember we had an eminent domain bill. And we must have had 14 amendments. And as part of that, some passed, some failed, some got divided. Some took out other amendments, and we got to the end of Committee of the Whole, and nobody knew what the bill exactly did, and there were arguments on where we were. And at that point, we had asked LSO, could you track all the amendments in and give us a new bill draft? We used a certain word for that. It was purple, and we've maybe done that 4 times in my tenure. When we amended a bill so greatly on first or second reading, that through the speaker or the president basically asking LSO, could you redraft this with all the amendments and track it for the body? We have had a multitude of occasions the past 6 years where individual members have asked LSO, hey, can you track these amendments in for me? I can't follow it. And from my understanding, in almost all cases, LSO has politely declined and said, we don't have the resources, the staff to go through and track all of the amendments into a new bill draft. So what we've come up with is hopefully a middle ground that if the body as a whole, by a majority vote of the members present, wants a bill to be, let's say, changes tracked into that bill for second or third reading to pass out to the body, and most likely as well publicized on the internet, on the LSO website, that members can also follow all of those amendments, because it's not only difficult for legislators, it's extremely difficult for a member of the public to look and say, well, these amendments passed, these failed, these got divided, this took out parts of the amendment. And so in those occasions where a bill is so heavily amended, we wanted a process in the rules, something formal, that a majority of the members could vote to have the bill track changed, was how I do it on Microsoft Word. Be happy to answer any questions on that or turn it over to LSO for additional information.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Yen.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So 2 things. While this is a joint rules recommendation, it doesn't actually need or required to be in rules. Each body could just choose to do that in a motion. I think the benefit of it being in rules is that it makes it very clear to members that this is a possibility that they can bring up as a motion to say, you know what, Committee of the Whole, second reading, we just had a crazy number of amendments, and it's so much text that has been changed. We need help. The public needs help to understand what we're going to do before third reading. Let's get a quote unquote tracked version, a clean version, before we go to the next reading. So again, I think this is good for the public. It's good for members, but it's not necessary, but it is helpful for both the public and members to know that this is an option.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I know I'm on my way out, and probably this is the future, and maybe then we need to get more attorneys for LSO to do this work. I spent a lot of time late at night cropping, literally cutting up amendments and putting them in bills, and did the work. And I think if you want to understand the bill, maybe you ought to do the work. And so I kind of have an issue with this. I think going forward, that's the way it's going to be. But I think we need to understand as Management Council that ultimately this may require more help May not initially, but in the end, you may have to have more attorneys, or, maybe AI eventually gets good enough that you can trust it to do some of this. But I just worry that we want to pile our work on top of already the stiff load that LSO already has. And, committee chairs kind of have the ability to do some of this now. And they ask at times LSO, and when LSO has the time, they do some of that for committee chairs. But I don't know, I think we're shifting workload, and if we do that, we need to recognize that that may require more staff and time. So, just my caution to those that are remaining.
Further comments?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
I wanted to revisit what Representative Yin was saying about whether this is a joint rule or a Senate and House rule. To me, this one actually seems like it should be split rules in each rule set, even though it can be identical language. It seems more appropriate to have in the House rules and/or the Senate rules, because there is no connection in this one in any way between what's going on in the two chambers. We brought it over from the tech process in this format, but after Representative Yin mentioned that, I actually think it's more appropriate to separate it out. You get into strange circumstances if you then later want to amend as one chamber a specific provision of a joint rule, then you get into odd complexities, which we currently have on the books, right? We've got one differentiation between the two, which causes problems. And there might be reason in the future to tweak this, and it wouldn't need to be a joint rule to tweak it. A chamber could do this differently. So I guess I'd just like to get Director Obrecht's thoughts on that. Is there any reason why this should be joint rule as opposed to just codified within the rules of each respective body if they choose to? Yeah, thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, and Senator Rothfuss, no, there really isn't. Just for uniformity between the two, the workloads in the two attorneys' offices was the only real reason to put this there. And it kind of fits in that joint rule 20.
It fits there, yeah.
Though, you read that and there's other reasons why you want those to be uniform.
Right.
That this doesn't have those compelling reasons in it. Mr. Chairman, and just for council's knowledge, we've looked at this issue a lot over the last few years because it seems like, hey, there should be a technological solution to this. We can't find one yet. It doesn't mean in 2 years we couldn't find one, but right now, we don't believe the AI or available technologies can do this job for us with the current staff we have. We would like to be able to do it. We would like to be able to produce an amendment tracked version of the bill for members in the public between committee of the whole and second reading, and then second reading and third reading. It'd be great. There are some legislatures that do this. Maryland is one. But when we really dig down on that, what it turns out is their processes are extremely different than ours. They got a lot longer sessions. They don't amend their bills anywhere nearly as much as we do, and they have a lot more staff. We could do this bill between every reading if we multiplied our bill processing section by 4. That's what it would need to be during the session. And then the way we amend bills would need to be different too, because you're putting out this version of a bill. The way we'll have to do it is like a comment section in a PDF document, because you cannot mess with the line numbers or the page numbers on a bill, because that's what people look to how to read in the amendments. So we've got that challenge on what our style guide, what our conventions are for amendment drafting, and then also our process for those amendment drafting that makes this difficult for us. And then how fast we move, just how fast we move during such short legislative sessions. It makes all of those difficult. And how much you amend the bills, that's also part of it, so.
I just know from the last couple of years how many members have come up to me and said, I don't understand what we just did. These 4 amendments, how do they work? Can you track them in for me? And when I started, we had 17 attorneys, and there's always someone like, oh, this is what we just did, and I could go to them for help. But I was certainly turning into the resource to try to explain, and they would go to LSO, and no criticism to LSO, but LSO was very firm on, we don't do that for any one member, and it was frustrating for especially many new members. And I know we have a lot of new members coming in, and this kind of old adage that has been here every biennium, if you don't understand what a bill does, vote no. We need to make sure, especially our newer members, when you're having this multitude of amendments, they need to make sure they understand what they're voting for. Or I think sometimes people get a little flighty and say, I don't fully understand what this does, I'm just going to vote no on some really important legislation in my mind. So I think this protects LSO from having to say, well, there's a policy and a process. If you think you can get a majority of the floor to agree, we will do this for you. I just think something needs to be in policy somewhere, because I mean, some people say it's a workload. I agree with a good speaker. I've been up till 2 a.m. sometimes going, I do not understand these 9 amendments and how they interact. And I've red penned and had different bill drafts I'm printing out. And I've been here for 20 years. And so if I'm finding it confusing, especially when we divide amendments and some of the amendments take out previous amendments, especially from like first reading on a third, I mean, it can get complicated. And so I do think it's important we have some process in place to be able to, especially for the public as well, understand what a bill does, because we've all been here a lot when we've amended something, the public's still saying, oh, this bill does this. And you have to say, well, no, it doesn't do that anymore, but they won't believe you until you can give them, a better copy they can see, because they don't trust your explanation. And so I think that's important for the public information as well, that they could have a resource, not a formal, not official, but they could at least follow and say, oh, they weren't lying when they said they really did amend this. The budget's changed, the policy's changed on second reading. Because we've fell into that a lot lately.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the work here. And I like the fact that what you put in here is that it's going to require a majority vote. This is not something that just one legislator can go and just say, hey, I don't understand this, I'm not tracking. You're going to have to get over half of that body to agree with you to even slow this thing down and put a stop to it. So it's going to really refine, I think, at this point, a lot of the calls for this. But I will tell you, I mean, in my tenure in here, we get into some stuff that things get moving so fast, and you're trying to figure out how this works, and you literally at a point where you just say, I don't know what just happened here, I'm just gonna be a no, because until I slow things down and really comprehend it, I may do something that's gonna be detrimental down the road. So I think by putting the majority in there, that'll create the situation where others are gonna have to go to other legislators and say, hey, are you understanding this? And they're like, no, not really. Well, would you work with me to say we could put something together so we can kind of all understand it better before we move forward? I like it. I think it's going to give a lot of folks a lot more confidence in what they're doing, and I don't foresee this being abused. I think this will be something we'll see occasionally, and hopefully help people to be more involved in the process.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Young.
Mr. Chairman, one thing that the body could do, or the chamber could end up doing if this does go to the chamber as a recommendation, is that you could put a higher threshold than a majority vote, right? So you could put a 2/3 threshold. I would suggest you don't need to do that until you feel like it has become abused. If it becomes abused, then you can raise that bar. But if that's a recommendation that others would feel more comfortable with, you can move forward with a 2/3 threshold instead of a majority threshold.
Further comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Roth.
Just briefly on that, with 2/3, you can do anything.
It's an understatement.
But the other higher threshold aspect is you could require a few seconds as well, or something along those lines, so you have some preparation ahead of time. We have other motions along those lines. So if you had a motion, 3 seconds required, and then a majority vote, at least somebody wouldn't just spontaneously stand up and say, I want to see this, and then all of a sudden you've got a vote called on it. There'd be some talking ahead of time. So I agree with Representative Yin. There are ways to make it even a little bit more challenging, but I think the spirit of it's a really good approach.
Other comments? Other comments? Seeing none. Public comment? Any public comment? Public comment is closed. Committee, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the rule amendment as separate House and Senate rule recommendations.
As separate House and Senate.
Good, correct. I was going to ask.
Okay. So it's been Joint Rule 21-1C has been moved with separate.
Yep, and Mr. Chairman, it looks like it would probably be 11-7 in the Senate, 11-8 in the House, but as part of the motion, let's just provide like full flexibility to LSO to do it the right way.
Is that a second as well?
Yeah, definitely a second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Joint Rule 21-1, small c is passed. Mr. Chairman, public vote display recommendation.
one other
This is
thing.
the end of your list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did work with our IT staff and do believe we can put a display up on the legislative website or a subsequent link so people could watch the vote in real time. In the Senate, I think, as you're aware, the chief clerk repeats the vote after each one of the members vote. In the House, that does not happen with the 62 of us. And so a lot of people, they watching online through YouTube, et cetera, can't hear how we vote. They get the final vote, but they don't truly know how their legislators voted. We had a lot of discussions on what quote unquote electronic voting. This isn't quite to that level. Nothing on billboards in the chambers or voting at your desk machines. This is truly just a separate screen that would be from the LSO website where people could immediately see in real time how the legislators vote on bills. And so we made that encouragement to LSO. I don't believe there is any additional cost they believed would occur, but did want to bring that to council for your blessing or conversation on one more small step on, I guess we can call it accountability and transparency for people who are watching could look at the screen as roll call is going to know exactly immediately how your legislator voted.
And a brief addition to that, we had a little bit of a demo from LSO staff, and they already have most of it built out as a web form, a web page that you could go to and see it in effectively real time once it's integrated with the system, doesn't add additional work. And I think everybody on the committee felt good about that. There was discussion about having it posted within the chambers, and that was resisted. That was not something everybody felt good about, paneling all the walls with screens and providing that. So if a member wanted to see it as well, they'd pull up the same web page where that link would be on the legislature's website and have that availability, but mostly with the target just being, it sounds like it's more of a House problem. In the Senate, since our chief clerk reiterates the vote, to a large degree it's solved in the Senate, but there is not a similar solution in the House to provide real-time voting information. So I think it seems like a great compromise solution, which doesn't challenge any of the concerns, but meets all the interests.
Public comment. Seeing none. Committee, what is your pleasure?
I don't think we need a motion. I think it's just if we wanted to take action in any way.
Well, that's what I was asking, if anybody wanted to take action, because Director Albright.
Mr. Chairman, I think this will ultimately be up to the presiding officers in the 28th, but on whether they want that vote to be captured. But what council probably needs to approve is, if they're okay with that, whether we display it on the legislative website. Okay. And
there it is.
here is a mock-up of what it will look like. You'll notice that One key thing that we have to make sure of is that it says vote open during the actual voting process. Because then if somebody screenshots this, they can't say, hey, look, you got the wrong vote total posted. You said, no, the vote was open, and you have to look at when the vote's closed. The names will all likely display in white to begin with, and then as the chief clerk goes through the roll call, ayes will then change to green with a Y in front of their name, noes to red with an N in front of their name, conflicts to some other color, blue, and excused to yellow. I mean, those colors can be changed. And then when the vote is closed by the chief clerk, it will go to vote closed, and then that link will no longer be active anymore for that vote total either. It will then go on to the next vote total. But what will happen when the vote is closed, then it will upload like it does now to the bill page, to the digest journal for that bill with what the recorded vote was. So, yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think the big question for council is whether you want to link to these two pages, one for the Senate and one for the House, on the legislative website, which Management Council does control, not a presiding officer of either body. So I guess it's kind of truncated, but if the presiding officers approve this approach, would council approve the link to this site being posted on the legislative website?
I'll make that motion.
All in favor, say aye. 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 Those opposed, no. Motion is passed. I believe we're complete for business on all of that.
Mr. Chairman, we do have a proposed rule change from Senator Kinski
Oh,
that you received via email a while back, and then also that we just handed out on.
Senator Kinski, you have the floor on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an amendment to the media credentialing criteria and conditions policy. It would be on page 2, which is rule Matt, why does this say 22-1A?
Senator, let me walk through this for you.
Okay.
So Senator Kinski, after the issue of media access to the hallways off the Senate and chamber floor became an issue, requested a proposed rule change to allow media members to have access to the center doors of both chambers on the north and south hallways that run the length of the two chambers, and also to have access behind the bar in the in those two chambers to be able to capture either still photography or video photography from those locations. He and I discussed that the current media access was granted in a management council policy, and that a rule would likely have more force for the body to be able to enforce if the presiding officer chose not to. The other thing that we discussed, and was in a cover email I sent to you, is that under the Wyoming Constitution and under Wyoming statute, the presiding officers of both houses retain an incredible amount of authority over their chambers, the hallways, and the rooms that are used for the legislature. And if a member of the media or a member of the public was granted access to any of those rooms and was causing a disturbance, the presiding officer, despite whatever a rule says, always has the authority to maintain the necessary level of control in their chamber to remove any disturbance. But this proposed rule change essentially elevates the current media policy to a joint rule, and then also allows members of the media to shoot from behind the bar in each chamber. It does say, Mr. Chairman, that the presiding officer, sergeant at arms, or LSO may limit the number and times video crews and still photographers are allowed access to the doors on the north and south side as behind the bar as necessary to ensure the efficient operation of the legislative branch of government.
So, excuse me, go ahead.
Just a quick question of staff, just reading this and visiting with you, Matt, this may actually limit the presiding officer's choice, right? I mean, right now, according to the law, he can do pretty much as he wants. And would this limit his ability to do that, to just limit the number of times? Is it more limited? Would it restrict the presiding officers or constrict his current authority?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, yes. The answer to your question is yes. A rule would restrict the presiding officer's authority to a greater extent than the media policy does right now. However, I would say that it doesn't, though it isn't explicit within the rule, the presiding officer always retains the authority to control disturbances within this chamber, whether the rules grant him that authority or not.
So, Mr. Speaker, thank you. The current rule does say access to photographers and television camera crews is at the discretion of the presiding officers in each house. This rule then says the presiding officer, sergeant at arms, or legislative service office may limit the number and times video crews and still photographers are allowed access to the doors on the north and south corridors or behind the bar of the respective chambers as necessary to ensure the efficient operation of the legislative branch of government. I don't know that there's a huge difference between necessary to ensure the efficient operation of government and discretion, as is in the current rule. To me, it's essentially the same thing. It's you're getting underfoot, or you're just causing issues, and we're going to limit what you can do. Currently we allow them to shoot from the side, and I guess I'd have to reference my experience in the Senate in the last 2 years. One of the photographers said, it's really helpful if I can get behind the bar to take some of these photographs. So I went to the president, he said, sure, that's fine. Talked to the sergeant at arms, he said, you sure? And I said, yeah. No, I mean, if the guy's a problem, let me know. And so he was shooting from the side doors, he was shooting from behind, he's trying to make a living. And, there was a time before my time when there was actually a desk in the chambers that the media could be at. That's gone. And they can't be out on the floor. It just says they can shoot from the sides and the rear as long as they're not causing any issues. The only difference, I think, between it and the current rule is now we're saying that they can shoot from behind the bar, which, it's just nice for them to be able to get those perspectives. To shoot from 4 different angles. I'm kind of a shutterbug myself, and I know that being able to get in the right position for photos is important. I know we went through a little bit of a dust up here on the rule as originally proposed. That's gone, but there was some conversation about, well, it got in the way of conversations in the hall and so forth. If that becomes an issue, somebody just needs to say something to the presiding officer, as they always have. But the main change on this is it becomes a rule. It still gives the presiding officer discretion if it looks like it's hindering our operation, but it gives them access from 4 different angles. Actually, if I had my way, I'd say that they could set up in a corner in the front of the room too to shoot, but that's probably going too far. That's probably more than what this body is going to accept, but it's nice for them to be able to get a good shot, good photo. Now, my self-interest is I'd rather they were limited to the gallery because they can't see me. very well from there, just the back of my bald head. But these people are just trying to make a living, and it's a service to the public. I just think we need to allow them to have access, and if they're causing a problem, leadership can deal with it.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think it's important that we do understand that the presiding officer has that authority to do that. And we did have an issue last session in the House, kind of between a photographer and a member of the body. I've sat on that, by that window or by that door for 10 years. And I'm the closest one to that door. And it can be invasive sometimes when that camera, and I've never had an issue, but it can be invasive sometimes when that guy's 15 feet behind you and you could be typing a confidential letter to a constituent. And, from the gallery, you got these screen things where they can't see, what all you're typing, but really your desk is your office. And you do have to type a whole variety of emails to a whole variety of people. And so, fortunately, I think cameramen have been very good at not trying to push the limits, but I just think it's good to know that, I think it's good for everybody to know that the presiding officer can take care of the issue. I don't want, if this rule limits the presiding officer's authority, then I oppose this rule because I think he should have the authority to act as he sees fit. And so that's just, and I think both sides, on the issue of having conversations in the hall, each side of the hall is not always equal. You get on the side of the hall where I sit, and there's two leadership offices where you could go into the president's or the speaker's office or the majority floor leader's office. You can have a conversation. You get on the other side, and there really isn't an office where members can go in and have conversations. And so it's kind of a little tougher on that one side than it is the other, really to have a private conversation with another member. If you have media in the back, and some say, well, you should never have to have a private conversation. Well, that's not accurate. There's always a need for private conversations. Sometimes it's just to ask a question, well, what does this do? What's this amendment do? What does this bill do? So I just don't want to limit the presiding officer's authority. And so if this does, I might vote no. But there can be issues, and it finally boiled to a head last year. You could see that coming.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Representative Yen.
Mr. Chairman, Matt, is there anything that prevents a presiding officer from letting a photographer on the floor right now?
Mr. Chairman, I think in the media policy, it talks about access to the floor and when it'll be granted, but again, the presiding officer is not bound by this. That person retains control over their chambers if they see fit, so they could let, if requested, a member of the media to come shoot photography from the floor.
So, Mr. Chairman, for a question for Senator Kinski. Senator, is there a thought on why you decided to do this as a rule rather than modifying the existing management council policy? And if the presiding officer can already do this, allow this, why have it as a rule?
Chairman Kinski.
Yeah, I'm fine with it as a rule. I'm fine with it as a modification of the existing management council policy, whatever is the pleasure of the group. I just think the rule makes it a little bit clearer. And we could have no rule and just say, it's up to the presiding officer to let people have access to any place they want to shoot a photo or not. you know, with no rule, that's what it would be. The fact of the matter is, people tend to read the rules, they tend to respect the rules. Members of the media are gonna look at this and say, okay, I've got potentially access to 4 different angles to shoot. If it says only from the side doors, then they're gonna say, I only have access to the side doors. They're not gonna go so far as to say, well, gee, if I could just ask the president. I mean, you know, this one photographer, he's just not the fellow that's gonna start tracking the president of the Senate down and asking if he can shoot from behind the bar. You know, he happened to mention it to me, and I said, let me see what I can do. But people read these things, and if it says side doors only, that's what they're gonna do. That's why to put it in writing. Otherwise, you just wouldn't say anything at all and just see what happened. If it was completely silent, I doubt that it would occur to some of these folks to say, gee, could I get out on the floor, the chamber floor, and shoot some photos? We have it in writing just because people tend to read it and respect it. I don't know if that answers your question, Representative, but I hope so.
So I'm going to speak opposed to it, and it's for a different reason. It's kind of interesting. You know, having been a presiding officer and one that's about to have no say in it whatsoever, is there's times you want them there, there's times you don't, and it depends on what you're doing. This doesn't bring up budget times, doesn't bring up anything else, and there's times that you necessarily don't want people there. And I can tell you, I never turned down a single request, you know, for what it comes. We deal with the press daily almost. Speaker Summers and I met with them. They all knew where they could go, how they could go. But we did have some trouble with it. And the interesting part is what this does to a presiding officer is they hold this up and say, we don't think you can tell us we can't be there. And for me, I will tell you, I want that presiding officer to have the ability, if someone's out there and they're either doing pictures of people's computer screens, or in the case that we had, someone using a directional mic leaning over the edge to pick up conversations. I think you really need to have the flexibility of that presiding officer to have a handle on what's happening in that chamber. And each one of these things limits those. And I would ask for any abuses that have been out there that would cause a rule like this to come in, because I can tell you for mine, I'm sitting here looking at press in the back. They've routinely asked me not only for access to the hallways, but to my office and to some other areas that I said, great, I don't have a problem to it. Probably the only spot that I ever restricted the press at all to was our lunchroom. And we did have people asked to come into the lunchroom, and I told them they could take a picture from the door, but they could not enter in, because it really is what Speaker Summers brought up. I'm about to be relegated that your only office is your desk. So you sit there and your computer's on your desk, all your paperwork is, and they can see who you talk to, but it gets really pretty intrusive if you're trying to have some idea of privacy other than in the restroom. And if you open up those hallways, now you're standing outside leadership offices, because that's where you're at, both sides. And it makes it much more difficult to have hallway conversations, which, by the way, we do all day long, particularly with leadership. So, you know, I never really restricted it, but I always wanted to have the ability, if we were in a spot, that you could do it. And the other point I can bring out is these exact rules, we had it happen last year, anybody can stand up and with a majority vote of the floor can override the presiding officer if they think he's being abusive to a member of the press or being ornery. I don't see it happening, but I do see it getting used in reverse that says we've now created a right that it makes it much harder to control. So I'd encourage us to vote this down unless we got a problem. Senator Kinski.
So first of all, I don't know what happened on the House side, what problems they had there. On the Senate side, when you were talking about somebody using a directional mic, they were not bona fide members of the media. And I hate to hang, you know, genuine bona fide members of the media with whatever behavior there was by somebody in the gallery with a directional mic. I'm not sure what you're saying about when you want photographers there or not, depending on what we're working on, whether it's budget time, but this clearly says that you would have the authority to ensure the efficient operation of the legislative branch of government. You just say, you know, for the efficient operation of government, I don't want any photographers there for today. I don't know that there's ever been a photographer photograph somebody's screen and then do something with it. I suspect if they did that, that would be the last time they were not only in the hallways, but probably it'd be the last time they're working for whoever they're working for. I can't see that being tolerated by the media, but you know, you want to have a hallway conversation, you step out and, you know, Mike Smith's there, you say, Mike, I need a couple minutes. He's gone. He's gone. I mean, you know, I hate to gauge how we treat the majority of the media by the behavior of one or two actual bad actors or perceived or imagined bad actors, because I think any one of these folks, if you need to step into the hallway and they're there snapping photos, you just tell them you need a couple minutes, they're going to be out of the way. That's my feeling about it, Mr. President. Thank you.
A couple of comments. One, I'm going to ask a question, Director Obrecht. I believe the directional mic was credentialed media. If I remember correctly, they were credentialed and they had the right to be there. And all of the mainstream media knows that they've got pretty unfettered access. Maybe it's going to change at some point, but I can tell you from my end, there's people sitting in this room that have run stories out of my office with pictures in it because we allowed them in there. And I think we're searching for a solution to something that's not happening, but we're potentially causing what can be thrown back in our face is a pretty tough deal that if you do have these abusive characters, they're going to be holding this up and saying, well, is this a bona fide use for you to shut me out of here? Because, you know, I want to be standing in the hallway. And I think it helps put them on notice to say, look, if you're being abusive, we're going to tell you you can't be there. And the body can always override us. That's the place I'll go to. I learned some really good lessons last year, is if the presiding officer tends to be abusive in any way, it merely takes a member to step up and override them. That's really all it takes, and they shouldn't be afraid to do that. But I think you need to leave them with whatever powers they have to make the chamber as efficient as we can. And I can tell you with us, that instance caused a lot of angst in our chamber. I can tell you, Director Obrecht, without saying too much, it was not one member that complained, it was many. And I believe they were credentialed because I actually sat down with them and they more or less refused to follow my directive because they were credentialed. And I think anybody can get credentialed almost. If you got a camera and you got a website and a self-published paper, I'm not sure we've got a means to tell them no. Is that correct, Director Obrecht?
Mr. Chairman, I would just say that in issuing of policies, though we haven't had widespread abuse of people requesting media credentialing, that we read that under the First Amendment as a very broad definition of what a media member may be. And that's how we've handled it.
Representative Yen.
Mr. Chairman, so one really large issue with the rule is that because the rule isn't in management council policy, it doesn't actually, I mean, except in the title members of the media, it doesn't actually say what a member of the media is, nor does it require the still photographer or the video crew to be a member of the media. So if Speaker Summers next year decides, oh, I have a camera and I want to go behind the bar, the rule basically says he can do that until he's stopped. And frankly, if the rule goes forward, I think I would strike video crews because video has audio on it, and I would not want an audio video recording from behind the bar because you capture things that you cannot capture in the lobby or in the gallery. But I do think that because it's in rule, it really allows literally anybody behind the bar until they're told that they can't be, as long as they have a camera on them.
We're back on the amendment. Senator Kinski, would you like to move your amendment?
Yes, I'd move my amendment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded, discussion? Public comment? I better do that before someone comes after me. Here we go. We actually have some. I was going to bypass them. Welcome, Mr. Downing. I was going to do my normal ignore you. I looked over at Senator Rothfuss and realized he was about to pinch me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of council. Jonathan Downing on behalf of Wyoming Press Association, and appreciate the discussion that's taken place over the last few weeks and months. The value of having this policy in place, and appreciate the amendment from Senator Kinski, is that in the calm before session, you have a policy in place when it comes to with respect to members of the media. I'm probably one of the few in this room that remembers and was actually on the floor when we had members of the media at the desk to the right of the speaker's desk in the House. And I also remember the consternation from the media when that privilege was taken away years ago. And there were a number of reasons why that had taken place. But as far as the Fourth Estate, it has a role to play in making sure to share with the general public the occurrences and what happens on the floor. Granted, there are things that come with that responsibility. And for professional journalists that are credentialed media, as to the situation that happened last year, if I'd been aware of it, I would have visited with whoever that organization's group was as far as what's normally expected of members of the media behind the bar. There have been amazing photos over the years that have been caught from behind the bar, from those side doors, from the above as well. Media obviously is changing. I don't want to get into the broadcasters side of the world, but in general terms, with members of the media, if you credential a member of the media, you can also take that credential away. And whether that be at the national level, which I've dealt with over the years as far as within campaigns and elections, or the state level, if you have a credentialed member of the media who is not abiding by some of those unwritten rules that are already in place, but still abiding by making sure to share and report the news and also capture what's going on the floor, there's amazing what can happen with a photo. And so what I'd still go back to, though, is that within the last sentence of the policy, and when you're not in the storm of session, when tempers might be a little bit they might be a little bit shorter, but besides presiding officer, you still have the authority as far as through your sergeant at arms or through your LSO. And that does put staff in a pickle there as far as where do you define that, how do you leave that in place? But in general, would look at this policy as from an access standpoint for credentialed members of the media, and even some of those newer media that are out there, it's still an access piece. It's still that Fourth Estate, and media has changed dramatically since that time, 30 plus years ago, as well as now. And so with that, I'd be open for any questions.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Downing, let's say you are lobbying for another group, like any other group that you would lobby for, and you say, you know what, this rule says that as long as I'm a still photographer, I can be behind the bar. I'll just go behind the bar, I'll take some pictures, and then I'll also do my other job of lobbying. Do you think that should be allowed? Because as I read the rule again, I do believe that it's actually possible.
Mr. Chairman, when you're acting as a member of the media, you're acting as a member of the media. And there's that line there. When it's a member of the media who crosses that line and starts to lobby, that's a line there that no longer acting as a member of the media, in my personal opinion.
So, Mr. Chairman, to follow up, I don't think that there's any restriction that it requires them to be a member of the media. The rule text itself says video crews and still photographers. Nowhere in the text of the actual rule does it mention what is a member of the media. The only media definition comes in our Media Credentialing Management Council policy, but that's separate from our rules. It's not, nor does it restrict this rule. So I still believe that the text of this rule would allow literally anyone to go behind the bar.
Mr. President.
A camera.
Not to interrupt Mr. Downing, but the title of the rule is members of the media. But when we're done with public testimony, I'll move to amend that we write in to say video crews and still photographers that are credentialed members of the media. I'm happy to make that amendment when we get back to it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Downing. You know, you've been around quite a while now. When you say that public access and transparency is way more than it used to be. We have video now. Anybody can watch video. They can watch it live all the time, and you see what's going on. Isn't there more access than there's ever been?
Mr. Chairman, we greatly appreciate the access that's already present through cameras that are operated by the Legislative Service Office. Members of the media, independent or otherwise, can capture different aspects of a story by getting it from a different angle. And so within access, we have made strides there. There have been steps back in the past as far as when they were no longer allowed on the floor.
Mr. Downing, can you give me any examples of anybody being barred from any of the doors or behind the bar in the last 10 years? Because since I've been there, I haven't seen one.
In the last 10 years, I can't recall. I do know there was an instance in the last 20 where you had a member of the media that was not necessarily abiding by what would normally be accepted practices of professional journalists that cross that line between what is expected of a member of the media who's supposed to be reporting on a story and not be a part of the story. And that was addressed through what I would say is mainly self-policing within the industry, as well as conversations that were very direct from leadership.
So follow up, what makes us need this policy? If we're not having any abuses, it's not there. What makes us want to put this there when you've already got unrestricted access? I'm out one, so this is really easy for me. If this was year one, it'd be a little different because there's a conflict of some kind. But having sat there, every time you put one of these in that puts the handcuffs on, and I can tell you we ran very close to that last year with the instance with Mike, is they literally just said, look, I've got the right to be here. You don't have the right to tell me anything. And we came very close to going to the floor on that one because I had members that were upset and wanted something done about it, yet they kicked back. And when you give them one of these things, people do read the rules, and they come back and they're saying, I'm going to use my press to say that you're suppressing me to take a picture, when on one instance I say, we're having a joint meeting with House leadership and we just as soon not have you in this hallway until we're finished with it. You folks all would say no problem to that. We're in an era where someone might very well say, we want to be able to stand in that hallway. And there's good and bad to all end of it, but I really believe there hasn't been abuses. And I for one, hate seeing us put more paper in a book that could cause problems that really isn't solving a problem that's there. And I honestly believe if one of your members is being abused, if you show up at any of the leadership meetings and say, hey, we're being unfairly treated, there'll be a retreat, because you kind of got to see that earlier with the policy here. It didn't take long for massive change in policy when everybody realized what it really was, which was fleshed out in the press, and it really did do an almost instant change. So I encourage you to have thoughts about whether you want written policy there or whether you wait till if there's actually a problem. Comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I can appreciate your comments there as far as the issue itself. Addressing the issue that was brought up that had happened in the other side of the chamber, or the other side of the building, pardon me. If you have a policy, you can just as much have a policy that they can't. And there have been some discussions from members of the Press Association with staff as well as other members of the body. But what I would say is that you have the discretion to clear those halls when you have meetings. You also have the discretion to leave them permanently clear of any photography. And so having this as a guidepost for future legislative bodies, I think there's a value there.
Representative Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Dowling, appreciate you being here. And I would, just for a little bit of my edification on the history, what prompted the removal of the press from the chamber itself? Because I've been told that there was a desk up there, and granted, there's not a lot of room now, but at that time, what prompted the removal of that press position or station up there?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My understanding is that it was with the new configuration of the desks. In 1992, when I was a page in the House, we had more desks in there than we do now. And so it's, as far as that floor layout, it was also a large table. But I'd have to go back to some of that history as far as to the why. Some of those members of the media that had been longstanding, covered the legislature for decades. One of those members still does some writing right now within Wyoming, but I'd have to phone a friend and ask Joanne Barron actually on that one, sir.
Yes.
So that's my curiosity. I'm just wondering if it was because of some kind of a problem, or if there was something that needed to be remedied, but basically you're saying it was just because of a space management issue at that time?
Mr. Chairman, that's my understanding at that time. It had correlated to around that time when, and the year's escaping me right now, but it was around a similar time when a member of the media had stepped out of that area where they should have been covering a story versus becoming a part of the story, which was very limited, wasn't talked about a lot at the time. It was dealt with. As far as back to the issue of access, though, historically, you have those shots that come from those side doors, from the back and from above. If it becomes enough of an issue, it's one of those where I think it's a partnership with the Fourth Estate. The other piece that you can look to is similar to what you see in other legislative bodies of having pool cameras, having access for certain shots at certain times.
Further discussion. We are on the amendment. It's been, excuse me.
Just more public comments?
Any further public comment? Thank you, Mr. Downing. Back on the amendment. Further discussion. Senator
President, I would move to amend the amendment on line 2.
Okay.
After the word still photographers, I would add that are credentialed members of the media.
Been moved, second.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion's passed. We're back on the amendment. Senator Kinski, another last bite at the apple.
Yeah, Mr. President, I would urge an affirmative vote on this. I think it's important to have in writing that the media has access to all 4 of those doors. Really, if I had my way, we'd bring the table at the front of the chamber back. That would resolve the issue of side conversations in the hallways. This problem was created because the table was eliminated, but you'd sure know what they were shooting photographs, and they couldn't shoot photographs of people's screens. But my sense of it is we're not going to be able to revisit that one. So the second best is to put in writing that credentialed members of the media can have access to all 4 of those doors, and if they're causing a problem, leadership can deal with it. I would urge an affirmative vote, Mr. President. Thank you.
For discussion, Representative Yan.
Mr. Chairman, I would offer an amendment. I move that we strike video crews and on line 2, video feed or on the following sentence, I don't know what line number that is, and video crews and on the 3rd sentence, which is on the 3rd last third of the rule. And with a second, I'll explain
Second.
that.
Moved and seconded. Continue on.
Mr. Chairman, video crews allow for audio recording. If you allow audio recording on the floor of the chamber, then you might as well just allow radio members of the media to also record audio on the floor of the chamber, anybody else to record, that are members of the media to record audio on the floor of the chamber. If that's something you want to do, I think we should explicitly add audio crews as well. Otherwise, I would ask you to support the amendment to strike video crews.
Mr. President,
Representative Stiff.
just a question for Representative Yen. It's my recollection that we already have TV crews that set up in the side doors and film, because I recall that because my desk was right next to that, and I'd have to worry about tripping over the cable getting there. So it seems that we already allow, the local TV station to make recordings, so I don't see how prohibiting it makes sense.
So,
I mean,
Mr. Chairman,
I don't, to me, it doesn't, I've never found that having the video camera there really prevented me from being able to do my job. And frankly, we're all in the publicity business and we all want more exposure all the time. So we're all, I don't see the problem with leaving in video crews. But if you wanted to add, well, just leaving as is. So I'm on against the amendment for now. I'd just be interested in hearing your explanation.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. President,
Senator Kinski.
yeah, video crews, I'm unclear as to the rationale for striking video crews is because they can record audio, but we're broadcasting all the audio that's going on in the chamber now. That's number one. Number two, I don't know how you differentiate anymore. You take a camera, any camera anybody's got, you flip a switch and it goes from being still photographer to video photographer with audio capture. So the video people are just as entitled to the same kind of access as the still photographers, and on and against the amendment, Mr. President. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Yen.
The biggest difference between this rule and our current management council policy is that it automatically allows for members of the media with the amendment to be on the floor. So not just on the hallways where they record currently, but literally on the floor. One example is that we have informal rule committee meetings, for example, that are on the floor of the chamber that, they video from the side to tell that story, but they don't get to be on the floor in that rule committee discussion to determine how that rule committee is going to recommend for the rest of the House chamber. If you allow that on the floor, then you are allowing them to record literally any discussion, whether it's a discussion where I might go up and ask a question of the dais to the speaker while the speaker is presiding over the chamber. They would be able to have an audio recording of that now. Is that something that Management Council wants? Is that something that we want to present to the chambers as a rule change?
I'll make a few further comments, and you made me think about it. So when you read this, it's also behind the bar, which you rarely see photographers behind the bar steady now. I can tell you as a member of the Senate, I have often stood right by the post of the bar because I can hear all the conversations of the House members as they're waiting to speak. And you're gonna have the same with the press. It really is a very different situation. Senate's a little different. We speak from our desk. We have lots of conversations on the House side, myself included, sit on the benches at the back, and if there's photographers there, it really does change the way part of it happens. I think this is a much more significant policy move than anybody really realizes what it is. And I think you're inviting it to be much more difficult to have private conversations
Mr.
with
President.
members. And that's an important part of what we do. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Senator Kinski.
on and against the amendment, I just wanted to respond to Representative Yin. The sixth line says, provided the individual and equipment is not actually within the chamber floor. no video feed or still photographers may be taken from any other location. So I'm a little bit confused by your argument that this rule is going to allow them to be on the chamber floor because it's specifically prohibited.
Representative Yen?
Yeah, Mr. Chamber, that probably is a misunderstanding from my part, and misinterpreting behind the bar. If it's still behind the bar, I think that's fine. I'll withdraw my amendment.
Without objection, withdrawn. We're back on the original amendment. Senator Kinski, another bite.
Nothing further, Mr. President.
Any further discussion? Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just share some of the concerns that have been raised. We have a system right now that isn't broken. I have not heard any complaints, and I say that having been a part of the Technology Process Committee where we tried to change the policy. And then when we were changing the policy, there really weren't any complaints at the time. But following support for a policy change, there was a rather significant concern over the proposed policy change. We heard a tremendous amount of feedback, so we came back and revisited it, heard public testimony, and ended up withdrawing the support for the policy change, which I think was an appropriate decision. I supported that withdrawal of the policy change. But at no point in that process did I actually hear members of the press and media say, and everything's screwed up. No, all they wanted was for it to be left alone. That's what I heard. That's what I got from the Technology Process Select Committee. Works right now, don't break it. We've had a long discussion about what this may or may not do. As Representative Yin was raising the idea about video cameras and this is now in a rule and what it allows, I'm left with a lot of questions where right now we have had a policy in place for a long time that has worked. And there are some minor concerns here and there, but at the end of the day, it's worked. I'm not eager to support a change to a system that has proven itself to generally work as it's intended to without anyone from the community that it specifically affects, either side, coming forward and saying, boy, we really need this because it's not working. So I'm on against the amendment. Proposed rule.
Further discussion? Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No.
Motion carries.
Motion fails. The prerogative of the chair. Would you like a division, Senator
No,
Kinski?
I'm fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Motion failed. We're back on the end. I believe that is the end of the select committee's end of it. We're on to update of the personnel manual. Does anyone need a break before we go? Otherwise, we're going to continue on. You want a break?
Break. No, keep going.
Okay, I'm just checking.
Roll on.
We're all older people, I didn't know. So, update of the personnel manual, this is Director Olbrecht and Lily Sharp. Wonderful to see your smiling face, Lily.
Mr. Chairman, it's nice to be able to recognize Lily. The last time I saw her, she was coming through the Joint Appropriations Committee chambers, but it was in costume. Were you the cow or the flower or the dragon? That's what it was. It's good to see you, Lily.
Mr. Chairman, I'll let Lily handle most of this, but for the first time in my memory this summer, we had a member of LSO who is also a member of the Wyoming National Guard need to take military leave. He was going to officer candidate school. And we found out we don't have explicit military leave within the LSO policy. So while he got granted military leave anyways, we thought it best to put this in the policy, and Lily did all the work on this, so take it away.
Mr. Chairman, so what we did is we looked at our handbook, which provides that military leave shall be granted in accordance with Wyoming Statute 1911-109, A through E, which is just a very small amount of the military leave statutes in the Wyoming Military Relief Act. So what we did, just to make sure that we were doing applying all the law appropriately. We looked at in addition to the personnel manual, we looked at the Federal Uniform Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, and in addition to that, the full Wyoming Military Leave Act, plus the Wyoming Department of the ANI, Wyoming Department of Administration and Information, military policy. And that military policy developed a lot out of an executive order that then Governor Meade in 2013 signed, that created a military compensation commission and provided certain additional benefits for those who had served in the military and were employees of the state after 9/11. And so what we decided or to recommend to you all is to adopt one part of the administration and information policy. Their policy is actually quite long, and what it does is it applies the federal law, and the state law is a little bit different. So this policy went through and it basically adopted that executive order, as well as incorporated the more stringent provisions of the federal law and the state law. And so there was just one change that we thought might be beneficial for members of for LSO employees who are also members of the military, that we don't already apply. Again, we already comply with all of with the Wyoming Military Relief Act. But that was to add that what we call a compensation differential, and that's the differential that the executive branch provides, and that is that if you have a member of the military who goes on unpaid leave, and that's leave that is more than 15 days, the military member automatically gets 15 days per year of paid military leave. But if they take extended leave beyond 15 days, then that is unpaid. And so the executive branch provides that the military member may receive the difference between their military pay, their base military pay, and then their pay from the state of Wyoming. So that's what this policy is. The wording is taken almost directly from the executive branch policy. The only words that we've changed is LSO in there. And that's it.
Comments? Senator Rothfuss, back on you, Rep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there anything related to benefits that this influences? I don't know whether it would affect it anyway. It doesn't seem like it. Sounds like no. Okay, thanks.
No.
Any comments, committee? Public comment? Public comment is closed. Motion, Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. President, I move to adopt the proposed policy and updates to the personnel manual.
Second. Mr. Co-Chairman. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion is passed. Thank you. Stellar job. You're batting 100.
Great.
1,000.
And I'd probably be remiss if I didn't mention at this point in time that due to how accommodating Lily was in granting this military leave, she was also recognized by the person who was granted the leave, Tanner Weekly. Her employee nominated her for an employer who went above and beyond to accommodate and make sure that a military member felt welcome by their employer while deployed, and so good job on that. Yeah. She had a plaque and everything. Presentation at the last staff meeting.
It was really for LSO.
Yeah, it was for you.
Mr. Chairman, 1 second while I pull up what I was going to look at the time. There it is. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to start without Ms. Hytrek if you would like
I
that.
think
Otherwise,
Tanya's right here. We'll just wait for her to
Great.
come on in and have a seat.
We are so fast, so efficient, we got
So Representative Yin, please go ahead on CSG West Annual Meeting.
so, Mr. Chairman, I am the chair-elect for CSG West. As many of you know, CSG West and CSG as a whole is one of the organizations that the legislature is a member of, the state of Wyoming is a member of, as well as NCSL. CSG West has an annual meeting every year, and CSG has an annual meeting every year. The chairs of the region rotate partisanship, and so this year we had a Republican from Oregon host, and next year will be the Democrat from Wyoming that hosts, and we will be hosting the 78th CSG West annual meeting September 16th and 19th next year in Jackson, Wyoming. I believe in 2020, we had planned to host it in Jackson as well. There was an issue with that with the global pandemic, and so we ended up hosting that one virtually. So I'm excited to be able to be both the chair and host in Jackson next year. Preparing for that, we've been working, we did some scouting, and I'll let Ms. Hytrek go into that as well as during the annual meeting this year. We had staff members attend the annual meeting to see both what organizing and putting on a meeting looks like, as well as advertising the existence of us hosting next year. I also have our first host committee meeting, which has members of the legislature from all corners of Wyoming. And I would invite any members that are returning on management council to join the host committee if they would so choose. I'm happy to have them. Next Monday, I believe, will be our first host committee meeting. And so I'm excited to get that rolling so we can get an agenda set up and talk about what kind of topics that we'll discuss at our next annual meeting. And with that, I'll pass it on to Ms. Hytrek.
Tanya, please go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, a number of your LSO staff did attend the meeting in Portland to scout sort of how to do business and how to conduct those sessions and kind of get a feel for what it will be like to host in Jackson in 2025. And when we returned, we started meeting with CSG staff that is tasked with sort of the details, everything from choosing the venue, setting up contracts for the hotel, finding activities for friends and family, off-site tours. It's pretty extensive undertaking by both CSG and your LSO staff. And so in August, we had a select school facilities meeting, and Ashley Phillips and I met with the CSG staff along with a couple of other LSO staff that were there for that meeting. And we scouted the Snow King Lodge as the location for the hotel and the meeting activities. And then we looked at several different venues for the dinners.
And Mr. Chairman, thank you. So, I mean, one of the exciting things about hosting is that we get to set the agenda, and I'm excited to really have an agenda that not only talks about Wyoming issues, but issues that affect all of us in the West and how we work together on a lot of those issues, right? And so those are somewhat driven by our CSG West committees that members of the legislature are assigned to, but as well as the chair, and I'm excited to have that discussion with the host committee to see what we talk about. And it also brings us together with usually members of our neighbors to the north and sometimes our neighbors to the south to talk about those transcontinental trans-sovereign issues that still affect us as a state and that we have input in, such as the Colorado River, or with our friends in Alberta, for instance, they're one that is also a very mineral-based economy, and being able to share ideas back and forth on how we tackle issues in different countries even, I think is really relevant. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Committee, do you have any questions of CSG West folk? Well, congratulations, Representative Yin, for the chairmanship. That's pretty awesome. So, and Tanya, thanks for trying to get caught up on this one. It'll be a little different task for LSO, but it's good.
And Mr. Chairman, I hope we can share this with all our new members, is that it gives them a chance to also meet members from other states and really build those relationships, but as well as let them know what representatives and senators from Wyoming are like, so they know that they can come to us for ideas as well.
Thank you. Is
Mr.
there
Chairman,
any,
one last comment.
Sure.
You did appropriate through your feed bill last year $150,000 for this effort. It's for meeting obligations, but also for per diem for your staff and for your members to attend, both the cost associated with registration and also your hotel and those types of things. And then the remainder is a sort of fundraising effort on behalf of the members for the remainder of the budget.
thank you for that reminder. If there are no questions, I would go to public comment, if there's any public comment on CSG West. Not, I don't think there's any committee directives that are necessary. Matt, we're all good. We got the money appropriated, so. With that, I think. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just one more item of business before we go into executive session, and it's not on the agenda, but Heather just reminded me. For the LSO Christmas party this year, we are going to book the Cheyenne street trolleys and go view the Christmas lights, but we're going to have a happy hour first, and we would like to hold the happy hour here at the Capitol. And we usually, Management Council has a policy that says all state building commission rules apply to legislative space unless specifically differentiated by council. And so the one rule that I would like council to do for December 6th is allow alcoholic beverages to be in legislative spaces. I know there's never been an alcoholic beverage allowed in legislative spaces
No.
before. So.
So moved.
This would be an exception to that rule.
Awesome. So we don't like fun, so.
So moved.
Okay, it's moved by Senator Kinski and seconded by Representative Stiff to allow, on December 6th, to allow alcohol in the legislative spaces for a party.
LSO Christmas party.
Christmas party. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? I guess we are for fun. Motion passes. All right. So now I think we are, once again, we are moving the reviser's bill to tomorrow. And so if I could get a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Moved by Senator Kinski, second? Second by Representative Nyman to go into executive session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll go into executive session, so let's kick everybody out and shut our mics off.
And Mr. Chairman, just for those listening online, there won't be any public business conducted after this meeting, so we won't go back into a video feed.